It's the tendency of most of us to want to strip very complicated ideas down to their bare minimum and explain them as if they're very simple things that we can just kind of talk about in sound bites or short sentences. But in actual fact, within the internal arts, that can be a little bit of a problem. Sometimes I see linguistic patterns in the way people speak when they talk about a concept or when they write about it. And you'll see these things come up all the time where they'll say something like, this is just this, or this means this, within... and often they would apply those kind of ideas when they're talking about things like qi or shen, or maybe they're talking about concepts like wu wei or ziran, or maybe they even, maybe higher minded, talk about God or heaven or these kind of things. In the martial arts, maybe fa jin or, dantian or these kind of ideas, right? These concepts that are actually very, very intricate. And then people will say things like this, oh, well, fa jin is just da 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 da, or shen is just da 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 da. And what they normally mean is, generally, if you translate their definition into what they're trying to say, what they're saying is, these were old antiquated ideas that are just explaining something very, very simple, actually. I think that's a massive error. I think that's a huge error. We should always be cautious of taking a deep concept or a deep idea and saying it is simply this. Now, the reason for this, the reason why I'm against this is because of kind of the nature of spiritual work and esoteric traditions and internal traditions, because I know some people won't like those terms, spiritual, esoteric, whatever, but you know what I mean. But within these kind of arts, is that many of the concepts or the ideas that were focused on and heavily invested sort of huge amounts of time into by spiritual practitioners for generations and generations, the reason so much effort and time and study and mental energy was invested in them is because they were almost unfathomably deep. This was just kind of the nature of them. Also because there's many different levels to something, and the nature of something is that if it is a truth, then often that truth resonates on many different levels. So we can see this within classical texts or scriptures. Say, for example, something like the Tao Te Ching, but it can also be applied to any classical text within Eastern arts or Western Abrahamic religions. Different people will read it and get different interpretations of that text. Now, obviously, the person writing it probably had one interpretation in mind, or maybe in their conscious mind, or perhaps they were profound enough to recognize some kind of truth that was universal across all kinds of different paradigms and different kind of levels. And this really, to me, is what separates a kind of wise classical text from a sort of contemporary text, or one that we wouldn't call a classic. So if I take a text that I consider to be very, very clever, perhaps very psychologically clever, very ethically clever, very philosophically clever, generally I can read it and know what they're talking about. They can give examples, and I can think of many modern books like that. Whereas classical textbooks or classical scripture or classical religious texts are very interesting because I can read them, and many people can read them, and they can all read them from a different place. So they can read it from a very literal place or a very philosophical place, or perhaps they can read it with regards to their art they're practicing. For example, I can take the Tao Te Ching and look at it from the point of view of medicine, or I can take the Tao Te Ching and look at it from the points of view of Neigong or martial arts, and still find that there is a resonant truth within those writings. Now, a part of the reason that that truth is there is because, as I say, the nature of a truth, a spiritual truth, a kind of foundational concept within these arts, is that it works on many different levels. So what it means is you can come back to that text 10 years later when your understanding has developed massively, and all of a sudden you'll read it totally differently. Then another 10 years and you'll read it totally differently. Now, this is the nature of these kind of arts, is it doesn't mean that necessarily the person who penned that original text had all of these different ideas in mind, but what they have managed to do was touch upon one of those fundamental truths that is true across all of these different paradigms. Now, if we understand this, what that means is that we should never compartmentalize or box ourselves into a very strict definition that we can't get out of anymore, because then we're stuck essentially on one of those levels and we can never progress to other aspects of the art. So, for example, qi. When you first start learning about qi, on a very basic level, it can be air. Yes, that's true, actually. It can be the air you breathe. It can be the energy derived from your food. Yes, that is true as well. But actually, At first, when you start studying these arts on a very physiological level, that definition works. But as you go deeper and deeper into the art towards further paradigms, deeper concepts, deeper ways of understanding, the definition of qi can change and transform with your understanding as you move through different realms of your practice. And that definition is still relevant. You know, it's like the original writings match the new paradigm as you go deeper and deeper. And the same can happen with concept like Wu Wei. The same can happen with things like Shen or Fa Jin in the Tai Chi or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. So what it means is, for the cultivator that's going deep, is when you encounter these terms, first thing is you shouldn't not define it. You need to have some kind of working definition that you can work with. Of course, you have to have some. But you have to remember that that definition is open to change and adjustment as you go deeper and deeper and deeper. Where you will become stuck is if you find yourself using these phrases. Oh, it is just. Qi is just a model for. Fa Jin just means the muscles and the tissues, okay? Or Shen is just your intelligence, or whatever it is, you know. Like, as soon as it is solidified in your mind into something simple, you are stuck on that level. It's like you've mentally cemented yourself into that place. So you can't really go deeper within those concepts. It becomes very difficult if you start discussing these concepts on other levels as well, because you find that, in my experience, the majority of people would love to be able to say that a concept is just. They would like to have this clear definition that's very, very simple, doesn't mentally tax them, doesn't make them insecure. They can stick with this very simple definition, and that's that. And the problem is, many teachers will do this, or many writers will do this, and many sort of people speaking on the internet will do this, not just about Eastern arts, but about other stuff as well. And if they say, oh, well, Fa Jin is just this, or Qi is just this, or Shen is just this. Now, the problem is, other people listening often will go, well, that makes sense. Actually, yeah, because what he's saying, it does match my paradigm. And then they're instantly stuck as well. They're also caught inside that solidified model, that idea, because they simplified it down to the stage where it cannot progress, it cannot go deeper. In my personal experience, each of these ideas, these concepts, these things that were a large part of the Eastern esoteric traditions can be explored and redefined and re-understood and re-understood and redefined. This means that your understanding of all of these concepts should change year by year, month by month, week by week if you're progressing quickly, and shouldn't be the same as it used to be. Whereas when I see someone, a teacher or a practitioner, who's still like, okay, I defined what Qi was 35 years ago and I'm still working to that definition. I understood what Wu Wei was 10 years ago and still on that definition. It means they're no longer progressing. Okay, it means they are stuck, to me. They are caught within one of those paradigms. The problem is that ultimately, in order to understand these universal truths, okay, these truths talked about within the spiritual arts, there needs to be a degree of conscious fluidity whilst working with them, because it's only true, really, if it can be applied on many, many levels. If it is only applied on one level, the physical, or one level, the psychological, or something like this, to me it's not really a truth, not really within a spiritual tradition, because it cannot be applied across many, many different levels. People like to simplify things because it gives them a sort of mental position of understanding. Like, once that thing is boxed in, once I understand it, it's almost like I can look down upon it. Okay, this is this concept that I now know. And part of the reason we like to look down on something is, of course, it elevates us in our understanding. But then the problem is, when you look at other people defining it in different ways, then of course that creates now dispute. Because if you've already defined it, Qi is just this, and then someone else is saying something different, or Dao is just this, or Wu Wei is just this, someone's defining it another way, of course that person is going to be wrong to you, because your model is already set and their model is different. Rather than perhaps trying to look to see, okay, does this truth apply on that person's level as well as this person's level? Is this rule, this concept applied across numerous paradigms? If people could do this and understand these ideas in this way, there'd be a lot more room for growth. This was long spoken about within Taoism, and one of the problems was that if somebody was always defining or naming, as they call it, then they could never understand the nature of what something truly is. Because a Tao that can be named is not really the true and everlasting Tao.